I'm here because of, obviously, my mother, Maxine Graves Lee, Richard Wright, but there are several persons who played key roles in my development. El Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz, Malcolm X. Margaret and Charlie Burroughs, Lucille kind of pointed that out a little bit. I found them in 1962. I was stationed at Fort Sheridan, growing a natural in the Army and going crazy, reading all this literature, nobody to talk to. And saw this ad in the Chicago Defender for I think it was the Ebony Museum of Negro History at 3806 South Michigan Avenue. So I showed up one day, knocked on the door, it's a Saturday morning, and this white man answered the door. I said, damn, I'm in the wrong place. And this white man was a man by the name of Eugene Feldman, who is credited as being one of the founders of the DuSable Museum. And so I asked him, was Margaret Burroughs in? He said, yes, follow me. We walked into the kitchen, and this black woman behind this table working on what I did not know at that time was a linoleum cut. She's a world-class artist. And I'm staring at her, and she said, well, what do you want, boy? And I'm staring at a natural. This is 1962, and she got a natural. And I had never seen a black woman with a natural, all right? And so I just need somebody to talk to. I mean, I'm stationed out in Fort Sheridan, and I'm surrounded by these aliens, and I just had nobody to talk to. And she said, well, go upstairs and talk to my husband. So I walk upstairs, and Charlie Burroughs is sitting at this table writing, and I see all these books around me and everything. And he said, well, sit down, sit down. I say, you want something to drink? I say, I'll take some water. He said, no, this is vodka. Okay. And you know anything about me, I don't drink. I've never drank anything, but except water and orange juice and carrot juice and wheatgrass and stuff like that. But anyway, that became a long relationship. And Charlie Burroughs was the one that introduced me to Russian literature. And so I began to read Dostoevsky and Pushkin and others during that period.
In 1973, my first ever story appeared in an anthology called Cutting Edges. And when I was asked to comment on it for the biographies page, I wrote, I suppose the writer I'd respect most is the kind who'd make a good gossip, a better small-town con man, a bad rabble-rouser, and a worse debater, and yet still be serious. I had already published a book of poetry, and looking at that, half of it set in Mississippi, the other half about my neighbors in Brooklyn, I suppose I understood that I was not going to be the subject of my own work. I was of no interest to myself. I've published only one story that I call memoiristic. What I wanted to do was capture the difficulties and cross currents that define and rack and sometimes capsize or redeem the lives of my characters. Paula Fox, whom I greatly admire, said once, you've heard this from other people tonight, a good novel starts with a small question and ends with a big one. For me, many of those questions breed the public politics of the world, smack up against the intimate politics of the kitchen and the bedroom. And early on, I discovered that I love to live at the intersection where they so often collide.
I was in pre-med when I entered Loyola, and my father was a Polish immigrant. And when I dropped out, and out of pre-med, he was crushed and tried to crush me. And where do you go? What is it that you want to go into? I said, I'm going to be an English major. And he said, you won't have a pot to pee in, which was a kind of a family thing that we. And he said, what would you want to do that for? Because I'm like one generation removed from people who didn't speak English. In fact, my grandmother really never spoke a word of English. Somehow we communicated effortlessly. And I said something about Shakespeare. I don't remember what. Maybe I want to read Shakespeare. And he said, Shakespeare, everything Shakespeare wrote isn't one good bridge. And he really believed that. And I didn't have, it took me years to understand what the rejoinder should have been. And I want to rush to add that I'm not trying to tell a story by making fun out of a guy who just about worked himself to death. The rejoinder should have been, which I didn't understand, is that you can't really think of the Mississippi River that's got a lot of good bridges over it without thinking of Mark Twain. You can't really think of London that's got London Bridge without thinking of Charles Dickens. Writers do build. And Chicago has this richness of living writers, and of course this huge history of our Keats, Shelley, Byron, Algren, Brooks, Bellow. And what a writer does is a writer graphs the stories of the different subjects that the writer comes up with, whatever social level it's on. And I think that's one of the things that this award celebrates, is that all the different stories that you can graft and overlay on this incredible city are coming from the books that people write. And it gives the city a soul.
I was inspired by my college teacher, Margaret Walker, challenged by Maury Evans, and Gwendolyn Brooks provided for me an artistic role model. I wanted to follow in her footsteps and wound up recording those footsteps in a biography. It was from Obasi that I gained purpose as a poet and writer to search out Black experiential truth and style, to write to, for, and from my own Black experience. Additionally, I challenged myself to explore that Black experience, its history and cultures. I studied Black history in the Americas and in Africa. I strove to pursue excellence, to compete with myself, and secretly, and not so secretly, to compete with the prevailing white male supremacist world order and canon, to push against worldviews that would denigrate and belittle myself and all African people and all of humanity, to portray Black people in our full humanity and to push us forward into a more just and humane society and a protected planet.
My own most moving moment as a writer came one evening at a reading that I'd actually done here at the Newberry, and this is a little bit of a self-serving anecdote, so I apologize for that. Actually, it's a lot of a self-serving anecdote. A group of women stayed after everyone else had left. There were 10 of them. They told me that they were married to steelworkers who had been out of work for over a decade. These women worked 2 and 3 jobs, and these were not glamorous jobs, to support their families. They told me that they had not read a book since they graduated from high school, until they heard that my books take place in their scarred and wounded neighborhood. They came to hear me read, and they spent their hard-earned money on hardcover books, copies of my books, because they said my words gave them courage to face the difficult hand that life had dealt them. That my work spoke to them in such a way does me more honor than I can rightly express. It does me more honor than any award, however wonderful that award may be.
To be an African American is almost to have an identity clamped on you. You're Igbo, a Wolof, or Yoruba when you got on a slave ship. And sometimes all you did was get off the slave ship, and I'm colored. I'm trying to figure this. I'm colored, I'm Negro, there's all these pseudonyms. And you're born into this, I was born in this situation where it was mandatory that I be known that I was not fully human, things that were being said. That's one of the things that drove me. The other thing that drove me is perplexed, and it's about the African American middle class, the educated class. My most vivid memory of having my language corrected the day I went to school. And I came speaking the way my grandparents spoke, and this principal said no, and set me down. I was about to eat, and he corrected, you need to say some prayers. To be African American, almost as if in order to be accepted, and you have a reservation on this rare flight, but there's a limitation on the amount of luggage you can carry with you. And somehow they let you know things like the blues and the aspects of your culture cannot go with you. See, you're living with that. Now, in terms of being a writer, I don't know whether I hate to say that, it was not African American literary texts that motivated me to write. I was a freshman in a class of about 250, and I was the only black, and it was Greek literature, the Prometheus, Oedipus. I could not understand their punishment. I'm Christian. What kind of God can do these kinds of things, interfering with people's lives? And I don't know why I was so engaged, but at some point, Professor Newman brought me a collection of short stories, maybe edited by somebody by the name of Gold, and pointed to the name James Baldwin. And it completely changed my life.